Hello, I'm Alice Hale, and welcome to Pearl Grey. So, what is this? It's a YouTube channel that I'm starting. I'm starting it, which is exciting, but also a little scary and kind of weird, and probably no one will watch it, but like, whatever, I'm just gonna do it. It's about knitting, hence the pearl, and I really like tea, hence the gray for like Earl Grey, because Pearl Grey, it's a pun. See, I like puns too. Puns are cool. I don't really want to call it a vlog because the word is obnoxious to me. I understand it's a melding of a word. Like first you had web, log, blog, and then you got the V from video, blog, and just at this point I feel like it's too many like words melded with other words on top of other words, and like I know that's how language works, but I just don't like the word because it sounds kind of gross. I'm sorry. I know that a lot of people seem to call like their YouTube channels, you know what they have, like whatever this is, they call it a podcast. I think of a podcast as only being audio, and so it feels very weird to call something on YouTube that's a video a podcast. So I'm not gonna call it that. I kind of just want to make videos about fun knitting things and drink a lot of tea on the way. Maybe I'll just say I have a YouTube channel called Pearl Grey. I have a YouTube channel called Pearl Grey. That's, yeah, sure. It's a lot of words, but until I come up with a better thing, or like the internet comes up with a better word, then I will continue to call it that. I'm Alice Hale, as I mentioned, and which is also in the title card thing that you just saw. I live in New York City, and that is why you will probably at various points hear some street noise filtering up to my apartment. I do not actually exist inside of a little soundproof box inside of your computer. I am in my apartment. So there will be noise. If there's something that's going to be really disruptive, like where you won't actually be able to hear me or will be super distracting, I will try to wait until that is passed. But life is life. I am not going to edit out or wait for perfect conditions because otherwise I will never record these. I love to knit, and I have been knitting since I was 8 years old. I'm going to use this YouTube channel to talk about knitting, but also what I really want to do with it is, you know, take you places where fun, exciting, cool knitting things are happening, and talk with people who are more professional in the knitting world. Whether they're designers or spinners or farmers or, you know, authors or anything like that. People who have something much more significant to share with us than I do. I, as I said, have been knitting for a very long time, but I'm not some crazy advanced super knitter. I would love to be. That would be super cool to be a super knitter. For a very long time I did just knit as something that was familiar and gratifying because you're producing something that you're then able to use or give to someone or whatever. But I've really tried to sort of change my focus on knitting recently, and that's what this is a part of, because I want to get more into the whole knitting world. I want to really get a better handle on what it's all about and what amazing people are out there, and I want to share that with you too, because I feel like as I've been trying to investigate this more, there are a lot of great resources, wonderful podcasts and YouTube channels and books and all of that, but there were certain parts that were very intimidating for me. Something that became a major turning point for me recently, and the sort of thing that I never thought that I would have this kind of story that you know, when you hear people talking about something that's like, oh, well, this was the moment that something really changed for me, or this was the book that changed my life. I love books, so I never expected to have just one book that I could sort of point to and be like, this book changed my life. But surprisingly enough, it kind of did. About a year and a half ago, I went to a book signing at Strand, which is an amazing bookstore in New York that if you're ever visiting New York, I highly recommend that you visit. But I had literally, that day at work, I had seen something on their Instagram, I believe, about an event that was happening that night. It was a book signing with the author Clara Parkes, who is just the most wonderful soul and such an incredible contributor to the knitting world. I had no idea who she was at the time, because I'd been knitting, but I hadn't really been engaged with like the knitting world and the knitting community. So I see this post on their Instagram about this event that night. Clara Parkes is going to be signing her new book called Knitlandia, and it looked like a really sweet book. And I had just sort of spur of the moment, you know what, I should do something fun for myself tonight after work. And it was going to be timing out just about perfectly, where I would be able to leave work and get there just in time for the book signing. So I did, just on a whim. I didn't have knitting with me. I wasn't wearing anything knit or that I had knitted or anything. And I show up to this book signing and it is full of knitters, as expected. And everyone has their projects out and they're all working on them and they're talking with each other, and a lot of them know each other. And first of all, I was really happy to see this, because it was the sort of thing that I hadn't seen in New York, really. But I see all these amazing knitters who are working on their projects or wearing things that they've knitted, and they're talking with each other about their projects, and they all have these things, they start saying these words that like clearly they all have a frame of reference of, like Rhinebeck, or like, you know, well, I knew what Ravelry was, but them talking very specifically about being active on Ravelry and everything. And I start to realize, like, oh my God, these people are so much more legit, and they know what they're talking about, and they know what they're doing, and what am I even doing here? You know, who am I? I'm clearly not qualified to be here and count myself among them as a knitter. And then Clara came on and she did a reading from the book, which was wonderful, and she talked about her work in the knitting community, and she was telling us all these other sort of stories and things that got cut from the book and that sort of thing. And it was a wonderful event. And again, they were talking about all these things, and again, making reference to things where I was like, I have no idea what that is. And yet they were sort of throwing around these terms or whatever, or these places or things like that, that just were like, oh, apparently they know what that is, and I have no idea. And so at the end, she opened it up for questions. I raised my hand kind of timidly after a couple other people have asked very sort of like legit questions. And I just asked something to the effect of, you know, if I am a knitter and I haven't really been in the community, how do I try to sort of dive into that? How do I educate myself? Who do I follow? What do I read? What do I, you know, how do I become a part of that community? Because I really am not right now. I was very nervous. And she was wonderful and so sweet, and she really was incredibly encouraging. She pointed out that it's not like some kind of exclusive club that's gonna sort of reject you for not being enough of a knitter, which I'm always kind of nervous about, with not just with knitting, but sort of anything in my life. I think it's just a pattern of, I always assume that I'm not good enough, or not advanced enough, or I haven't been doing something long enough, or whatever it is, to be considered, you know, part of the group. And she just encouraged me to get more active on Ravelry and to follow some blogs. And I didn't really realize that what we see today is sort of the modern knitting community, which takes place mostly online because of distance and the world. But it really started from blogs. People like Clara and people like Mason Dixon Knitting, just starting some blogs and talking about knitting online, more and more people following that and starting their own and following each other. I was a little too young for sort of the blog scene when it was first really popular. But from there, a lot of those knitting sites and knitting podcasts and things like that grew into what they are today. And that's really kind of where Ravelry blossomed out of. And I've had a Ravelry account since I think I was 16, and it was one of those things that I made and I kind of poked around in. I was in high school. There were a lot of sort of like new trendy internet things like sort of starting and being dropped, and it seemed like a lot of work to be like photographing and logging your projects and stuff, and I wasn't doing a lot seriously in the way of like following patterns to make things at that point. I just didn't glom onto it and start following it and interacting with it and the other people on there in the way that it seems like a lot of other knitters did. So now I'm kind of revisiting it and trying to be like, okay, how do I make this work? What do I do with this? How do I make this, you know, a fun and addictive experience, which probably I don't need another social media platform to become an addicting experience for me, but that's beside the point. You can actually find footage of this book signing on YouTube. Strand records their book signings, I guess. And you can hear me asking my timid little question about like, how do you become connected to people in the knitting community? And because she had made reference to it at one point in the talk about solo knitters, about people who just, you know, they do their knitting and they go about their day and they don't really feel the need or know that there's a world out there to connect to. And I heard that and I was like, well, yeah, that's me. That's the model of sort of knitting behavior that I had to draw on, because both my mother and my grandmother knit, and it was always just, yeah, it was just sort of something that they did. And yeah, they would, you know, look for patterns and things, but it wasn't at the level of a social experience that it's become today. So I'll put the link to the video of the Clara Parkes Strand signing and reading below this. The other thing that happened there was that was the reading and the talk, and then we all lined up to have her sign our books, which I have right here. I should have held this up earlier, right? Anyway, this is the book. It's wonderful. It's actually just coming out in paperback, so if you don't want to spend the full amount of money for a hardcover, you can get a paperback now. But she wrote in here, let's see, says, "For Alice, have fun finding your tribe." So not only did she listen to my question and remember which one I was, but then she wrote a note about that in the book, which just warms my heart. And of course she would, because she's the amazing Clara Parkes. We were in line for this signing to actually get our book signed. And while I'm standing in line, about 3 or 4 other women, because it was mostly women, as the knitting community is, which I think is a wonderful thing, immediately start talking to me about like, oh, this is my Ravelry name, and you should really go to Rhinebeck next year, and like, this is, you know, my blog, and that these are the people that I like to follow, and this is when this knitting group meets. It, you know, these days of the week, at this time, and at this cafe, or in this knitting shop. And it was wonderful, and I was also a little bit overwhelmed. I was very busy at the time, and I kind of was like, great, I got down a lot of the information, and but then I didn't really follow through on it right away, because that's, you know, life. But it kind of percolated in my mind. Almost a year later, because it took me that long to get around to actually reading Knitlandia, which I feel a little bad about, but you know, books and life being what they are, you know, often you'll get something at one point and then you'll be like, I gotta read that. Anyway, about a year later, I finally started reading it. That was early this spring. And I fell in love. It made me feel like I was just full of like a warm glow of knitterly joy. And while I was reading about these amazing conferences and festivals and, you know, all these wonderful gatherings of knitters, it just started to make me yearn for it. And I actually hadn't been knitting much at that point, you know, here and there occasionally, but I just immediately, like, my fingers started itching and I started reaching for needles. And I finished this book unable to like keep myself from physically knitting while reading it, so like have it propped open and I was knitting along while I was reading, because the descriptions of these wonderful groups of people and you know, sharing in this experience of yarn and craft, and she's so wonderful at capturing the atmospheres of those events. And it immediately made me go, okay, where do I get more of this? It felt like sort of a high of like, these are my people, this is what I need right now, because I was starting to feel a little lost. The city's very big, life is tough, you know. And I was like, I need more of this in my life. So I started listening to some podcasts, and you know, a couple I can definitely recommend are A Playful Day and Woeful. They're so great. I mean, there are many, many more out there. Those are just a couple of the ones that I have loved most. And I started poking around on YouTube, and I wasn't so much looking for tutorials. I mean, those are very wonderful resources for when I am confused about something or I need to learn a new skill. But I didn't really want that as like the content that I was looking for. I was looking for, okay, so like, where are places where people are talking about this and connecting over this, and sharing information about like where you can find you know, other knitters, other knitting events, other knitting resources, and I found some channels that I really like. I like Christy Glass Knits is great. The Sweater with Kathleen Dames is amazing. That's, you know, when you're really going into all the details of like how a garment comes together and the reasons behind those things, it starts to just really elucidate patterns when you're reading them. I am not a huge fan though of the just like, hey, this is what I personally am knitting this moment, and this is like what's happening with it. It's not that I don't care about your projects, it's just that isn't very directly applicable to me, which again sounds more selfish, but you know, I like learning more about the knitting world rather than just hearing about what one person is working on their specific project. Because chances are I'm not also knitting that same specific project. So there's part of me that gets a little bored with that. I like interviews, and I liked, you know, visiting yarn shops and like going to different fiber festivals and things like that, with these people who have brought their wonderful cameras with them. And I sort of started thinking like, hey, I would love to do that too. And I started thinking about, other than living in New York, I also am originally from New Hampshire. And so while there are a lot of wonderful things happening in New York, and I'm certainly going to try to share those with you, I also kept thinking of like all of these incredible places back home. It's easy to kind of forget that all of these things that you take for granted, that you grew up with, are really so special. And I do want to share some of those things in addition to the wonderful New York things that are happening. The other thing that I am is I am an actor, which has its ups and downs. I was recently in a play, which was wonderful and so exciting. It means that I might not always have a lot of time, depending on how things are going. I might have lots of time. So I'm not gonna commit to a specific schedule at the moment. I'm going to tell you more about me and who I am, and also more about New Hampshire, because it's a large part of who I am, in another video, I believe the next video. So if you're curious about that, you can learn more there. But this is kind of the origin story of this particular channel and what I'm going to try to do with it. Fingers crossed things work out. So thank you so much for tuning in. I really hope that you stick around and are interested in going on this little ride with me, because I don't put myself up as any kind of an expert. I am maybe, I guess I'm an intermediate knitter. I'm not some like magical person who is going to be able to like show you how to do everything, or who owns their own woolen mill or something like that. So I'm not an expert in that way, but I'm really excited to maybe try to bring together a lot more information and experts and experiences that I think that other knitters would enjoy. And I think that I am currently positioned in a pretty unique place to do that. Happy knitting!